So it was back in 2008. So this has been a little bit ago, but at that time in my life, I was really trying to figure out where God would have me, in my career, my work. And I was debating, wrestling with God. Should I go into ministry, like a full-time ministry role, or stay in business? And at the time I was in an investment banking job. And so I was wrestling with that. And on a one Friday afternoon, I'm just working at my job. And one Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, wouldn't you know, my boss comes, knocks on the door and says, "Hey, can I come? Can I talk to you for a minute? Can you come into my office?" It's like, oh no, what's this about at 5 o'clock on a Friday? I'm ready to leave here. So I go into his office. He sits me down. He says, "Can you shut the door behind you?" So I close the door. I was preparing for the worst thing, that I was going to be fired. That's kind of what I had in my mind. I'm going to get laid off here. But he said, "Randy, we've got he was trying to paint this in a really good light. We got a great opportunity for in China, actually, for a project we're about to kick off, and we need somebody to go to China for 3 months." To spend time on this project. And we've searched the company over, and we've decided that it's you that we would like to send to China for 3 months. What do you think about that? And I thought, what? 3 months is a long time. We're going to miss my kids' birthdays and anniversary and all these different things. And I said, well, can I think about it a little bit? And he said, well, you better think quick, because I need you to leave tomorrow. So I said, what? So I said, okay, let me talk to my wife at least. And I called her on the way home, and I kind of got the sense was, if I don't do this, then I'm kind of out of a job. So it's either, do I want a job or not? So I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. This is an opportunity. I'm going to take it. So I called him back and said, yeah, I'm in. Just let me know what I need to do. And fortunately, didn't leave the next day. I left. It was I think 2 weeks later. They didn't realize I had to get all the visa stuff worked out. So anyway, I am going to China, wrestling in my mind. This is such a inconvenience to my moment of trying to figure out what I want to do in my life, and trying to figure out direction. And so, but here I am on this work trip for 3 months, and so never worked harder in my life. But I did have one Saturday. Now, that if you think about 2008, this was just after the Olympics in Beijing. And so there was the Olympic Stadium, and I wanted to go see that. And so on a Saturday, I went to this Olympic Village, and I'm there taking pictures of all the stadium and the different things. And this was before camera phones, so I didn't have the ability to do the selfie. But I had my actual camera, and I assumed somebody would know. And no one spoke English, by the way, that I was interacting with. I mean, I had trouble just communicating. But I went up to somebody, and I figured they'd understand cameras. So I just handed them my camera. Will you take my picture in front of the stadium? That was kind of what I was trying to communicate. The person took my camera and literally started taking out the batteries of the camera. And while I'm standing here posing, and I'm like, what are you doing to my camera? And I go and I hear on the kind of off to the side, I hear some laughter. Somebody was watching this interaction between me and this person messing with my camera. And this couple come over to me and said, "Hey, we'll help you out." And in perfect English. And I was just amazed. I was like, "You speak English?" "Yeah." "Yes, please." So I grabbed my camera back from this random person and put the batteries back in. And I said, "Can you just take my picture?" And they said, "Yeah." So I go do my pose. I take the picture, and they hand me the camera back, and we kind of, parted ways. And as I started to walk toward the subway, I kind of struggle to describe this moment, but I felt a weight in my feet, and I felt almost like I couldn't move forward.
Mm.
And I stopped, I hesitated, and I realized, I knew it after a few seconds, I realized what God was telling me to do. God was telling me that I had no excuse to share the gospel, to not share the gospel with those two people. They spoke perfect English, and I was to go back and find them.
Mm.
And I recognized it. And I said, okay, God, but I don't know what to say. And all the doubts started coming in, all the reasons why no, I don't think that's what you're really saying. I started to have those thoughts, but I realized that, no, God, you are telling me to do this. And so, okay, deep breath, God, Holy Spirit, please direct every word I'm going to say. And I need your help. Give me courage and boldness. And so I walked back, and I had lost them in the crowd. I don't know where they were. And I kept walking around, and I found them. And I went up to them, and it was a little bit awkward, you can imagine. And I said, hey, remember me, the guy with the camera? And we just struck up a conversation again, and we're talking. And I said something like, I've been over to this part of the world before on a missions trip last summer in the Philippines. And they said, oh, really? Philippines? Oh, yeah. But what's a missions trip? I said, well, a missions trip is, and there was sort of the opportunity that the Lord was giving me here. And I said, well, a missions trip is really when you go to any place, basically to tell people about Jesus Christ and what he's done for you, even what he's done for me. And I said, have you ever heard of Jesus Christ? And the girl that was with, was a guy and a girl, and the girl said, yeah, I know who Jesus is. My mom is a Christian. She said, I'm a Buddhist, and my friend's a Buddhist also, but yeah, I've heard of Jesus, but I don't really understand anything about Jesus. Can you tell me about him? I said, can I tell you? Yes, of course I can tell you about him. So I began to just share Jesus with her. Her name was Vicky, and his was Jerry. And I just began talking to Vicky, and I said, yeah, here's who Jesus is. And I told them about what Jesus had done. And we're walking back to the subway as they were heading home too. And we were just talking along the way. I ran up behind a tree in this little park that we were walking through. And I stood behind this tree, and I said, what separates us right now? She said, the tree. I said, that's right. It separates us. And if I wanted to come to you, Vicky and Jerry, I couldn't. This tree's in the way. And it's the same thing with our sin. And I started to explain what sin was. And sin separates us from God. And we can't have a relationship with God because our sin is in the way. And Jesus, though, came. He never had sin, but he died in your place. You and I deserve death, to be punished for sin. But Jesus died for you, and he took the punishment for you so that you wouldn't have to die and live apart from him, and you can have eternal life. And I said, Jesus didn't stay dead. 3 days later, he's alive. He rose again from the grave, and he's alive today, and he can forgive your sin. And when I said that, something clicked within her. She said, Jesus is alive? I said, yeah, he's alive. And if you trust in him, he can give you a home in heaven. And she said, Randy, I've never understood Christianity until right now. She said, Buddha is dead, but Jesus is alive? I said, that's right. And she said, I've never understood it until right now, and I want to be a Christian. Wow. And she said, how do I do that? And so the three of us together prayed right outside the subway station in Beijing, China, and the two of them gave their heart to Jesus. And I was just like, you can imagine, like, wow, this was worth it. I mean, if not for anything else, this is why I'm here. And this is why I came on this trip. And I was just praising God on the subway ride back to my hotel. And I was thanking the Lord for what a great opportunity that was to do that. And I was saying, God, remember that whole discussion we were having about ministry and business? And God, I want to do more of that. Let's keep this going. I love that opportunity that I had. So let's just keep that going. And the next morning was Sunday. And I said, I'm going to church. I got to find me a church. And I found this church, Beijing International Christian Fellowship, I think it's called. They had an English service. And I said, I'm going to that service. I found my way there. I took the subway, and I was a little bit late, just figuring it all out. But all the way to the church, I'm praying, God, that last night, I just can keep doing that, keep serving you like that, and missions, whatever you'd have for me, God, I'm going to step right into that. And I walk into this church, and the music was still going, and I must have got on the last song, and the worship leader said, "Okay, everyone be seated." So it's perfect timing. I sit down with everyone else, and the pastor walks up. First words out of this pastor's mouth: "You might be here today wondering whether you should be in business or ministry." I had a double take. I was like, wait, what did he just say? Did he hear me? Was he on the subway? Like, I was literally, how does he know? How does he know what I've been thinking about for this whole time? Yeah, you might be here wondering whether business or ministry. And I'm like leaning up on the edge of my chair. And then he says, "You might even be here as an investment banker wanting to know that question." And at this point, because that's what I do, that's a pretty specific call out. I'm leaning forward. Tears are coming out of I know that God is going to use this guy, this pastor, to speak directly to me. And so I'm listening, and he said, I want you to know something. And he said, and he looked at everybody in the room and made eye contact with everybody. And I felt him looking at me. And he said, "I want you to know something. You matter to God. You matter, and you matter, and you matter." And he pointed at everybody. You matter to God. Don't ever think that what you do doesn't matter, and that you have been strategically placed exactly where you are right now as an ambassador of the gospel.